Welcome to the Maria Liberati Show, where food meets art, travel, and life. This is Maria Liberati. This is the show where everyone has to answer the question, what does food mean to you? Tell me in a recorded soundbite of 60 seconds or less, or a written post of 50 words or less. Post on social media, hashtag it the Maria Liberati Show. If your soundbite or hashtag is selected to be part of an upcoming segment, I'll send you an autographed copy of my book, The Basic Art of Italian Cooking, to you as special thanks. And just a reminder, I am having a lot of contests going on and giveaways. If you follow me on Instagram at Maria Liberati, you'll find out about my contest. We just gave away a copy of my book, The Basic Art of Pasta, and we're having some really neat giveaways for the holidays with a couple of food companies. So you'll find out about that on my Instagram account. Just follow me on my Instagram account and you'll have a chance for some of these giveaways. For the giveaways coming up in November and December are only for listeners in the United States, but we will have some more giveaways of my book for our international listeners also. But again, just follow me on Instagram at Maria Liberati. You can also follow me for my hashtag Friday favorites on Facebook at Chef Maria Liberati and Twitter at Maria Liberati with a capital M, and of course my website marialiberati.com. So 2020 will go down as the year without an Oktoberfest. Yes, this was, I think, the first year that Oktoberfest was canceled in Germany. And the ever so popular beer, though, is gaining an even more popularity in places that hardly used the trickle of the stuff before. While sales of mass-produced beers have been faltering slightly, the craft beer sales have been rising, and there are more micro and nano breweries popping up all over the world. In Italy, beer is being served in place of wine at meals more regularly and in watering holes. Of course, there was always beer in Italy, but it always took a back seat to wine. And cooking with beer has also become just as popular there, as well as all around the world. I was hesitant when I was recently asked to develop recipes for a beer company, but never realized how easy it is to cook with beer. It's even more economical most times than cooking with wine. In all my recipes, I used mainly darker malt beers that work with stronger tasting foods like beer with sauteed peppers and beer with sauteed mushrooms, using beer in place of white wine. For the home cook, the recipes are easy to follow, and beer is usually conveniently available in your fridge. When you cook with beer, just like when you cook with wine, you should serve it with that very brew that you used in your recipe. As mentioned, the best beer to use in this recipe is a dark malt to get the best results, but you can certainly try it with whatever you have in the fridge to make it a quick, easy experience. Beer with pasta, who would have thought? But here's this delicious dish that uses fusilli pasta and beer. And if you can't find fusilli pasta, rotini pasta will do well just the same. Just remember, make sure the pasta is made with semolina flour. And again, for best results, dark malt beers work best, but if you just have beer in your fridge, to make it less complicated, try the recipe with whatever beer that you do have. Here's my recipe for what I call sparkling fusilli. 1 pound of fusilli pasta, half a cup of cream, or a vegan type of a cream. And you can make a vegan cream using soy milk and cornstarch. 1 pound of mushrooms, clean stems, removed and sliced. 1 clove of garlic, 1 cup of beer, 3 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil, 2 tablespoons of broth, beef, chicken, or vegetable. Salt and pepper to taste, 3 tablespoons of Parmigiano Reggiano cheese, grated or shaved. And I always tell everyone, if you want to make this a vegan dish, this is definitely vegetarian if you use vegetable broth. If you want to make it vegan, just get vegan substitutes for the dairy ingredients, the Parmigiano Reggiano and the cream. And you can use, I've used nutritional yeast to get that cheese flavor without the dairy. So without the Parmigiano Reggiano, you could also put in nutritional yeast. So you're going to place the olive oil and garlic in the saute pan, saute over medium heat until the garlic starts to turn golden. Add in the mushrooms and saute till tender. Add in the cream and the broth. Remember, it's vegetable, chicken, or beef. My preference is vegetable. Stir and let simmer on low for 3 minutes. Then add in the beer and continue to simmer, stirring every so often until the sauce is thick and a creamy consistency. And what's going to happen is the alcohol actually burns off and you're left with the flavor of the beer. And you have this thick, creamy consistency. Meanwhile, while that's happening, you're going to cook your fusilli or rotini pasta till al dente. And I always tell everyone, follow the directions on the package of the pasta that you have. That manufacturer usually knows the best cooking time for their product. And of course, taste as well to make sure that's to your liking. You know, you may want the pasta cooked a little less or a little more. So remember, when it's almost done cooking, taste it to see where you're at. Once the fusilli are done, you're going to drain them, top the fusilli with the mushroom beer sauce, and then top that with some type of a grated cheese, or as I said, a nutritional yeast, and a handful of freshly chopped parsley definitely garnishes the dish. And serve this with a glass of the beer, the very same beer that you used to cook the dish. And you have it sparkling fusilli. Hey, who's missing Oktoberfest when you have your own dish? You can cook at home with beer. I have someone as my special guest who, gosh, I think we've known each other for a long time. And I know if you are talking about beer, Gary is the person to go to. This is Gary Monterosso, and he's the host of What's on Tap, You Ought to Know on PBS, a beer connoisseur. I mean, if you want to know anything about beer, Gary is the guy to go to. Gary, thank you so much for being with me today.
Maria, it's a pleasure to chat with you. And as you mentioned, we've not gotten together in so many years. We used to do those events all over the tri-state area. And let's face it, coronavirus has just put a damper on everything right now.
Yes. So unfortunately, we're not going to be able to do one of those events this year, but it's nice that we're able to get together this way anyway. And at least we get to chat and catch up. But you know what, Gary? So I had mentioned that I am going to be doing some recipes on cooking with beer, and I wanted to ask you, do you have any favorite recipes? I know you're really a beer connoisseur, and I know sometimes wine connoisseurs shy away from cooking with wine, but do you have any, do you get involved with cooking with beer? Do you have any favorite recipes?
I unfortunately have to decline on that. You don't want me to cook, Maria. Let me tell you right now. I mean, I have to stand over a pot of boiling water to make sure I'm doing it right.
Okay. That's no problem. That's like as I was telling you, I know the like sommeliers and wine connoisseurs, they don't cook with wine, and it's kind of the same thing. So I'm thinking, you know what, you probably, because you know so much about beer. So anyway, so tell me, I know we started talking about, because I was mentioning that the last time I was in Italy, because of the rising prices of wine and the trends, people even in Italy are getting more into beer than wine, and they're cooking with beer, and beer is just all over the place. So, and I was really shocked because I was seeing more people coming out of stores with lots of different beers than wine, which about, 10, 15 years ago, you would hardly see them buying beer there. Every so often you would. But anyway, so you were telling me there's some really interesting beers coming out of Italy?
There are, and I was actually exposed to them primarily in New York City, believe it or not, at a place, and I know you're familiar with this, called Italy.
Yes.
Which is absolutely remarkable. One of the principals involved with that was a fellow by the name of Sam Calagione, who, as you probably know, owns Dogfish Head Brewery over in Milton, Delaware.
Yes, that's right.
Sam was involved with that, and I got to meet a couple of Italian brewers who were over kind of learning the craft and getting into the American way of doing things, of brewing. And they released several beers, which I believe are still carried over at Italy in New York and maybe in other locations as well. One thing I like about the Italian beers is that, as you might imagine, they're integrating ingredients that are indigenous to Italy. So you're going to see some dates, you're going to see some chestnuts incorporated into these flavors. And the beers, trust me when I tell you this, and I have some bottles down in my basement, are extremely well made. I'm thinking of companies like Balladine and Beneficio Italiano come to mind. These are two companies that I absolutely fell in love with. I did get to meet a couple of the brewers as well. And chatted with them a bit over some of their beers, and I'm just really, really impressed. There are beers being created, good beers, literally from all over the world. You think of the beer capitals of the world as being, Belgium and the Czech Republic and England, for example. But there are some countries that are developing quickly in terms of beer. We're seeing some really nice Mexican beers coming out as well. I'm talking about Mexican craft beers. So we talk about, we talk about Italy. We talk about even Poland. I'm seeing some things happen from Poland.
Wow.
But Italy, really love the beers coming out from Italy. And I'm more interested, you talk about cooking with beer. I'm frankly more interested in the pairing of flavors, how a dish marries with the beverage.
You know what? And I was just about to ask you that. So, I talked to a wine expert about, because it's really difficult to go out now to different places. So I talked to her about setting up a wine tasting in your home. So I think that would be interesting. Like, do you think, could somebody try to set up their own beer tasting, if you wanted just for fun, say on a Friday or a weekend, do your own beer tasting? Do you think, or could you give us any tips on setting up your own beer tasting?
Absolutely. I've done those. And regardless of how you set up, we can kind of pull things from the wine people as well. There are things called vertical tastings.
Yes.
And a vertical tasting, as you know, is when you take, I'm going to go back to wine, for example, where you take a certain wine and you do different years. So you kind of, maybe you'll do a 2018, 17, 16, 15, and see how the flavors evolved, if you will, over those years. Well, we're doing the same thing in the beer world, because you can now cellar. By cellar, I mean age certain beers. I have a beer cellar, Maria, which may shock some people. What's a beer cellar? Yes. I got involved with that. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that, and then we'll get into this a bit more. But a fellow by the name of Andy Musser, and if you're in the Philadelphia area, you're going to recognize him. He was a Philadelphia Phillies broadcaster for so many years, and Andy and I developed a rather close friendship. But I will say this, as a broadcaster, he was traveling literally all over the country to cover Phillies games. And as he's going around the country, he's visiting breweries from the cities that he's in.
Oh, wow.
Well, to make a long story short, he struck up a friendship with a fellow by the name of Fritz Maytag. Now, that last name Maytag may sound familiar to you through Maytag Appliances.
Yes.
Fritz did not become part of that industry. He rather, in San Francisco, bought a failing brewery at the time. I'm going back to the 1960s, I believe, called Anchor Brewing. Now, Anchor still exists, although Fritz sold the company several years ago. But Fritz is still alive. Fritz is still alive. He's a Renaissance man, speaks fluent Japanese. And just was so into his beer. And Andy picked up several cases of beer that he no longer could use. And he called me one day and he said, Gary, he says, I've got 5 or 6 cases of this particular Anchor beer. He goes, and I just don't have the space for them anymore. Can you use them? Now, I'm going back again to the 1990s. And I guess the oldest of his beers at the time went to 83, I believe. I said, well, gee, I've never done anything in terms of beers that are 10, 15 years old.
Right.
And he said, I stored them properly, and knowing Andy, he did. It wasn't in his attic. If it was in his attic, the beers would certainly be no good. So I met him in Philadelphia one day, and he delivered, about 5 cases of beer, 80, maybe 5 bottles of 83, 6 bottles of 84. Wow. And I broke them open sporadically, and I said, wow, this is so cool how a beer can evolve over time and change. And it got me interested in the idea of cellaring beers. So I'm really going off the subject, I guess, but you can, with certain beers, Maria, you can do vertical tasting. So I've done this with, I got to tell you, I teach beer classes, strangely enough, at Wilmington University. And I've done this with my kids, where I've brought out maybe 5 bottles of this particular beer and they try different, I'm calling them vintages, which again goes into the wine world. So if you're doing a home beer tasting, let's go back to subject number one. If you're doing a home beer tasting, you have two methods that you can use, and one would be the same beer but going back several years. You could do this with 2 or 3 different brands of beer. So that's one way to really go about it. And you can actually go to certain well-stocked packaged goods stores and find some of these aged beers. They don't all sell beers that are brand new. You know, you can find some aged beers. That's one to do it. The other way is to maybe do it by style, where you're looking at, let's say, brown ales, and you pick up 5 or 6 different brown ales. That's a British style of beer, but you can compare them and see how they actually work. So there's so many different ways you do this. And I've done that. I've done that with people. And another thing that you want to consider when you're doing beer tastings is work your way from the least to the most aggressive in terms of flavor. By that, what I'm talking about is hop profile. Hops, as you know, among other things, give beer a bittering taste. Without hops, you have a syrupy sweet liquid. So if you're doing a beer tasting, don't drink the hoppy beers, the bitter beers first, because if you do that, you're not going to taste anything else beyond that. So you start with the lighter beers, maybe with the wheat-based beers or a lighter lager, and then work your way up to the bolder flavors, you see. We look at something called, to the person who's kind of beer savvy, it's something called IBU. It's called International Bittering Units. And that is a numerical scale. Some companies put that now on their labels. And it kind of gives you a rough hint as to how bitter a beer may taste. So you keep that in mind. Plus, as you know, Maria, there's 1,000,001 good websites online where you can get reviews about beers, and I certainly go to them as well. So there it is. You wanted a little information. I gave you so much, and I apologize.
No, I love it. And you know so much about beer, and there's only probably so much you can try to fit in. And I know someone like you, because I'm the same way, you try to fit in as much as you can. So no problem. I love all that information. But let me ask you, so I know, when you set up wine tasting, they tell you to have a bucket because you actually you're really supposed to just swish it around in your mouth and then have like crackers or bread and things like that. Is there anything like that you recommend for people?
Maria, I wrote a book that came out in 2010, and the original title of the book was Wine Drinkers Spit, Beer Drinkers Swallow. So I think the primary reason why the wine drinkers do spit into the bucket is because of the alcohol content. So we don't normally do that in the beer world.
Beer does not have as much. Exactly.
However, I will say this: when I'm doing tastings with my students at Wilmington University, I do provide. First of all, I give them a very small amount because you don't need a bottle of beer to evaluate a beer.
Exactly.
You need 2 to 4 ounces, and that's what I'm basically giving them. However, I do give them a container. If they don't like it, they can dump it or simply spit it out, quite frankly.
And how about, now I know we were going to talk about wine, or not, I keep saying wine, beer pairings, because I know you said that's something that you're definitely interested in. So can you give us any interesting beer pairings or just beer pairings, like what, somebody could pair if they want to do a beer pairing at home instead of just the tasting,
Yeah, well, it's very subjective, Maria, you know that. And
yes.
Basically, try to keep this as simplistic as possible.
Yes.
You don't want either the food nor the beverage to overpower one another. You want them to be compatible.
Right.
So, and that's part of the problem I remember, I mentioned this story to you, if I may. I was in a room, I was working at an event in New York City with Jim Cook, who is the CEO of Boston Beer. That's Sam Adams.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So he and I are sitting in the back room. There was no one else around. We could call it the green room. We were waiting to go on stage, so to speak. And I said to Jim, Jim, I want to ask you this question about pairing beer with food. I said, to me, and I truly mean this, a complex dish is pizza. And I mention that because think of all the flavors that go into a pizza. You start with the dough, okay, and you have the creaminess of that. The dough is baked. You then have 1,000,001 toppings. I mean, the tomato sauce could be, so it's certainly acidic. It can be sweet. You may add cheeses to it. You may add pepperoni. You may add anchovies. It's a complex dish. Right. And I said to Jim, what do I pair with a pizza? I said, I've ruined more pizzas by having the wrong beer. Because Gary, keep it simple. Go with a nice light lager. And of course, he mentioned his Boston lager. And you know what? I tried it and it worked. Here I was looking for the most complex beer to match with a complex dish. And it didn't work.
It was just more simple. And sometimes we do that.
Simple. Now you can say, I talk about brown ales. Brown ales match nicely with braised dishes, with beef dishes. The wheat beers, where you get the clove and the cinnamon coming through, and there you want to go with maybe the salads, seafoods, things like that. So, a lot of it's trial and error. There is no one set recipe or formula for everything, but basically keep in mind you want things to be compatible and not have neither the beverage nor the food to dominate.
Yeah, I think it's very similar to wine. It's the same way they have to complement the food in some way. And it's kind of subjective. I know there's rules, but again, as you're saying with beer, it's subjective too. If you like something, then it just probably works. But that beer and pizza combo, that sounds like that would make sense, because you have a simple beer with a complicated, all these complicated tastes on a slice of pizza. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think it was last week or Wednesday might have been, there's International Beer and Pizza Day.
That's correct. Exactly right.
This past week was International Beer and Pizza Day. Actually, when this segment will air, we had it about a week ago. So I think the perfect combination is beer and pizza, and it's fun too, and it's an uncomplicated, fun combination. So Gary, go ahead.
Go back years before craft beer even took its dominant position as it does now. Basically, we were drinking very light lagers. If you think of the main brands, the Buds, the Millers, and the Coors, they were all pretty much making the same type beverage. And we didn't complain about beer and pizza back then, did we?
Exactly.
So here I was looking for the most complex beer, going with a very hoppy, bitter beer. That didn't work. I tried the brown ales and the saisons, and he said, Gary, just take it easy. Just go back to the beginning, go back to step one, start with a nice light lager, and you're going to find that it works. And he was right. So that's why he's the multi-billionaire that he is, and I'm going from paycheck to paycheck.
Well, you know what? So we talked about, the craft beer, cause that's so trendy now, and everybody's doing their own craft beer. Do you so if somebody wants to brew beer at home, home brewing, do you have any tips on that or suggestions? Have you ever tried that?
I have done it at home. However, I've gone to places called brew on premise, BOPs. Some of them exist where you can actually, in a sense, you're leasing their equipment and their supplies.
Oh wow!
So there are a few of them. Some have unfortunately shut down, especially since pandemic.
Yes.
But my daughter and I would frequent one in the Toms River area.
Okay.
And again, unfortunately, it did shut down, but you would basically walk in there. Of course, you would have a set appointment time, but you would go through binders full of recipes, and there were clones of whatever beer you may like. If I like Coors Light, for example, I can come up and brew my own type of beer that tastes similar to Coors Light.
Wow.
So it's much easier that way. And then what you do, you come back in a couple of weeks and do the actual bottling.
Wow.
So it's a nice thing to do. So my daughter and I did it, and my daughter's name is Kristen, so we created a Christmas ale. We came up with a spicy ale, with all the traditional holiday spices.
Right.
And I was so pleased with how it was done. I know of people who've done this for weddings, for parties. There are homebrew clubs, there are homebrew supply houses in virtually every state. And again, I know far too many that no longer exist, but again, social media is such a wonderful thing. If you put something out on Facebook or Twitter and ask for advice, where to get supplies, how do I create this particular beer, there are going to be people there who are going to be ready to help you.
Yeah.
Expense comes up with equipment. Maria, so many brewers that I've interviewed started brewing by buying these little Mr. Beer kits. When you pay like $100 and it comes with maybe a couple of recipes in it, and wow, it just fired the passion into this. And every time I interview a brewer, well, how did you get your start? I pretty much know the answer before they've said it to me.
Oh,
I
wow.
bought a kit.
Yes, and I guess that's a good, like, a kind of a first step, just to kind of feel it out and just get acclimated to it. So that would make sense then. That's really funny though. Wow.
You see that. Now, I want to mention this to you also, if I may, that in South Jersey, there is the South Jersey beer scene. That is a website and also a podcast, obviously promoting breweries and events taking place in the southern part of the state. And what they're doing actually right now is running a competition for home brewers in which they will take a winning recipe. I'm going to be one of the judges, I believe, in November. Wow. And the winning recipe the brewer will be invited to recreate his or her recipe with a brewery, with a professional brewery.
Oh, that's great.
This happens sporadically. Iron Hill. I know you're familiar with the Iron Hill chain of brew pubs, but I actually judged for them, I guess, last year in the Maple Shade area, where they actually do the same thing. They invite a brewer to submit his or her recipe, and then they invite that person in to recreate the beer, and then the company sells it. So for the home brewer, home brewers all seem to have this passion about getting into professional brewing. It is an expense. It's a lot of work. There's paperwork going through the state, go through the feds.
Wow.
It's a lot of work. And my goodness, Maria, this is not the time you really be opening a brewery. Let's face it.
Yeah, I think people, get a notion that, wow, it'd be great to do it, but they don't realize everything else that's involved. It's not just putting ingredients together to make beer. It's all the other stuff around it that people don't realize before, they try to get into it. But
I kind of drifted away from your question, which was about home brewing again, but it's creative. Home brewers and even professional brewers are a lot like chefs, Maria. You're very creative people.
Right.
And home brewers love to, they love to take recipes that exist and tweak them and see how they can put their own spin to them. And that's what makes brewing and the art of beer tasting so fascinating to me. I mean, I want to just go off the subject again just a little bit, which I tend to do a lot, by the way. But, let's take a traditional English style beer, for example. What the Americans will do, what Americans tend to do is, again, put their own slant to it. That's part of the beauty of brewing. You're not locked into a recipe. You can change things, alter them, and see how they play out. I've seen so many American breweries do their own spin on Belgian ales, Belgian doubles, Belgian triples, even Belgian quads.
Right.
Big high alcohol beers coming in at over 10, 12%. But they add, maybe local ingredients, do something slightly different from what the Belgians did, and you just create a whole new style of beverage. So for a beer drinker, for a person like myself who loves to try beer, this is utopia. This is the golden age, quite frankly. Maria, I can remember, again, in the 70s when there was just nothing out there. There was nothing to try. And now you go into a packaged goods store, there's hundreds of different flavors that are out there, and it's changing constantly.
Yeah. I know when you go into a restaurant, well, we can't really go in many now, or we're limited, but right, the menu, it's like a beer menu, and it's just like, oh my gosh, there's so many choices. So it's really, a nice thing that it's opened up, that there's such variety, and people are really into that now. So Gary, one question that I always ask my guests is, and you can answer it any way you want, and I know we're talking about beer, but do you, I always ask, what does food mean to you? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Say that again. I missed that question.
Well, sure. I always ask my guests, it's sort of an underlying theme of the show. What does food mean to you?
Food.
Yes, food.
All right. It's social. I like to eat a good dish with friends and family. I eat what I enjoy. Now, I had heart surgery 3 years ago, so I'm kind of limited as to what I'm eating right now. But it's a way to, I guess, express camaraderie with people. It's an event.
Yes.
And
I it's an event.
I
I like
appreciate a
that.
good meal. I really appreciate a good meal, and I appreciate the craft that goes into the creating
Hmm.
of a good meal. It's an experience.
Yes. I
So
like that too. An event, an
yeah,
experience. I like that. That's great. I love those answers. So, Gary, let us like what is there anything we or tell people like where they can find you, and also anything coming up that we should look for on what's on tap, or you ought to know anything you want to
sure.
mention?
Appreciate that. Thank you. Yes. Locally in southern New Jersey, I do a TV show called What's on Tap, which airs on Comcast channel 22 in parts of southern New Jersey every Thursday night at 9 p.m. And of course, the main arm of that, if you will, is getting the episode online, because we get frankly more viewers online than we do via television. So we upload the episodes to the typical social media sites such as Facebook, Twitter, YouTube also as well. The You Ought to Know show, now that's on Channel 12, WHYY Channel 12 out of Philadelphia, Wilmington. And that's a show that airs Thursdays at 7 p.m. As we record this, I believe I'm on tonight doing a segment on fall beers, where we're looking into pumpkin beers, which is
Wow.
something that's indigenous to the United States, as a matter of fact. So yeah, it's an interesting, there you go. You talk about beers from all over the world. Yeah. Pumpkin beers started here in the U.S. in the 1600s before.
Oh,
as the
that
colonies.
did.
Yeah. Because
Wow.
let's face it, pumpkins grew all over the place. They grew wild.
Right.
And they made a very good clean beer because you could convert them into fermented starches into sugar so easily.
Wow.
So,
I had never even heard of pumpkin beers. That's really
well,
interesting.
it's probably better to call them pumpkin spice beers because, as you know, pumpkin doesn't provide a whole lot of flavor.
Right.
But it's the cinnamon, the nutmeg, the clove, the allspice, those ingredients kind of bring out the flavor. And there's some really, really good ones out there. I love them, and I have a few here.
Interesting. So those shows, though, that you mentioned, Gary, I know they're local to like Philly area, South Jersey, but you were mentioning they're online, right? So people in other areas, because we have like listeners from France and different parts of the country, can actually look for that stuff online, right?
Yeah, the stuff is online. Thank goodness for online. That's been a godsend to us. You know that. Like, my goodness.
Yes, thank goodness for online, definitely.
I love doing it online.
That's great. Gary, thank you so much for being a guest, and hopefully I'll be talking to you soon. Hopefully we'll get to do something again soon, get to do one of these events soon. And
I like that. And I definitely, like I said, I want to invite you to, if you're interested, to provide some content for the What's on Tap show, because, you know, food and beverage go together hand in hand.
Definitely. Yes, I will. I will definitely be in touch with you. I will be getting you some videos. Definitely. Great.
Beautiful.
All right,
it's a pleasure to chat with you, Maria. Again, we haven't talked for so long.
Thank you. And I'm sure we'll be having you again another time. And I'll keep you posted and let you know when this is uploaded.
Sounds good. Thanks, Maria.
Thank you, Gary. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining me and listening to the Maria Liberati Show. If you create my sparkling fusilli recipe, share the picture and post it on social media, hashtag it the Maria Liberati Show, and we'll be sure to pick up the picture and share it on my website. We're gathering pictures for my new and upcoming website. We'll be unveiling the new website within the next few weeks, and we'll be gathering your pictures to share on there. Thanks to my producer, Britton Roselle, my production intern for this segment, Max Tedford, and this week's guest, beer expert and host of PBS show, What's on Tap, Gary Monterosso. Go to my website, marialiberati.com, to keep up with my blog and the show and my book series, The Basic Art of Italian Cooking. And you can also follow me on Facebook at Chef Maria Liberati, on Instagram at Maria Liberati, and on Twitter at Maria Liberati with a capital M. And don't forget about my Facebook Live events on Fridays, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You never know what I'll be cooking up or talking about, so join me on my hashtag Friday Favorites on Facebook Live. That's on Fridays at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And follow me on Instagram to find out about all the giveaways that we're doing in the months of November In December, we just gave away a copy of my book, The Basic Art of Pasta. Follow me on Instagram at Maria Liberati. And don't forget to post your answer to the question, what does food mean to you, in a recorded soundbite of 60 seconds or less, or a social media post of 50 words or less. Hashtag it The Maria Liberati Show, post on social media, or email it to me at maria@marialiberati.com. If your answers are selected for an upcoming podcast segment or for my social media, you'll also receive an autographed copy of one of my books from the Basic Art of Italian Cooking series or the Basic Art of series. That's it for now. Peace, love, and pasta. Until next time.